Welcome to StartupJab.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As always, you're here with Teague Hopkins of the Teague Hopkins Group and Jason Nellis of Overachiever Media. We're always glad to see you guys here. Today, we've got some really awesome and special guests, and rather than butcher it by introducing them, I'm going to let them do it themselves, particularly because they're from such a unique place right now, and I mean physically, as in their car. Paul, Brittany, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, we are coming to you from sunny, cloudy Santa Cruz, California right now. I'm Brittany. I am a designer at Microsoft, and this is Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul. I'm a designer at Power Supply. And yes, we are in a car. We were hoping to be in the coffee shop next door, but it is a bit loud for talking purposes. So we decided to hold ourselves in the car where it's pretty comfortable in our little Mini Cooper.
Nice.
Very cool.
Broadcasting from the Mini. Excellent.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with us. T, you want to open us up?
Yeah. So I understand you guys have written a book. What is the title of your book?
We have. Mm-hmm. The title is Crafting Your UX Portfolio, a weekend guide to getting it done.
Ooh, I like the subtitle. So what inspired you guys to write this book?
A mixture of things. So we run a meetup, and the meetup group in Mountain View called Designer's Hearth. And we like to get together with a small group of other designers and talk about, things that they're tackling in their day jobs or what they're looking for if they're just getting started in design. And a lot of the things that came up were, what is a portfolio? What do I need to put in a portfolio? Is it just a lot of pretty screenshots? Like, what's too much? What's too little? And the other thing from my side, at my startup, Elementum, I was hiring a lot of designers. And so I would be reviewing all of these portfolios. And I would start to see things like patterns of, I really wish that they had, more story, or I really wish that they had like a bio of like, a little bit more personality about themselves. And so as I started creating this checklist, I started writing down the things I wish that I saw in more portfolios.
And then combine that with my background doing a ton of consulting, just startups and companies here and there for design, and having to sell myself day after day after day as a designer and sell my work and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't. So with both of us having gone through the pain, kind of that moment, I was like, I have to put together a portfolio. I have to write about my work. I have to talk about myself and I have to explain it. We both kind of saw that pain in a lot of other designers. And we figured, why not talk about, at least from our experience, the things that have worked for us, the things that haven't worked for us, and see if we could guide some people towards presenting themselves a little better so they get a better shot at, working somewhere that they want to work at.
Cool. Well, and if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about sort of, the kind of, UX and design theories that you subscribe to. I mean, what are the kinds of important, tenets that you think should, every designer should be thinking about when they're thinking about a user experience?
Good question. So one of the things in our book that I think is interesting is to think about design for at least from each designer's perspective, is to think about kind of the skills that you have. So some people are very more visual, so they're going to be more towards the visual design and branding, and they have different principles and aspects that they subscribe to. Whereas some interaction designers might have different theories of like, the least amount of clicks or below the fold, but everyone subscribes to different, I think, methods or theories.
Well, that's also one of the most confusing pieces about the design industry right now, as far as it relates to technology, is that there's a million titles out there and a million roles. What does UX design mean? Half the people you talk to, they'll say it's not a thing. It's just good design. Yeah. And the other half will be like, no, it's very specific. It's, user research with, prototyping and usability testing and all this, this whole cycle. And what we found is really it's all about the skills that you bring to the table. It's about your process. It's about the steps that you take to learn about the users or the customers or whoever it is, the target that you're designing for, that you're trying to solve a problem for, and taking the steps in the right way to, nail down your assumptions and figure out how can you validate them pretty quickly through, whatever it is, visual language.
Very cool.
So when I think about a design portfolio, I think the image that I have in my mind is more typical of sort of a graphic design portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about how that is different from a UX design portfolio and what the different elements might be in that?
Pretty pictures aren't everything.
Yeah.
Especially for a UX portfolio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the things that I really look for in portfolios is it's really good to see the whole process. So like seeing pictures of sketches or seeing the whiteboard, so all the thought that went behind the final product is really important. So, what was the problem statement that you were trying to tackle? Tell us a little bit more about like, what is it that you were trying to solve? Who were you trying to solve it for? So who are the users and what was the audience that you were targeting? And then it's also really cool to talk about like your team that you worked with. So a lot of the times it's not, you're not always on a project by yourself. So it's not a team of one. So talking about like who was on the project, were you working with developers? Did you have a product manager? Like what was the dynamics? And then the other thing that's kind of fun sometimes is what were the constraints? So what were the problems or the bumps in the road that you hit along the way? Because all of this makes a really good story.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Constraints. There's always more things to do and not enough time, resources, or whatever it is to get them done.
Mm-hmm.
There's always struggles that happen, between people. We're all trying to make things. So the constraints, I think, is pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's your design process story. So, tell us about, step by step, walk us through, like what happened. You went in and you met this person and you talked to them and you learned a little bit about what was happening. And so you decided you're going to test this by doing this sort of thing. And, what did you learn? Was it good? Was it in the right direction? Was it not? Did you get a flash of inspiration? Was there some insight there? Share what happened. Were you stuck? Did you get confused? The design process story is one of those things that you could go on and on about, but it's very important to talk about all that because it makes you real as a designer.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Can you guys talk about? Sorry.
Oh, God. I was just going to mention, we're kind of going off the list. We actually have a case study checklist that has these 7 points because they're just points that we've extracted from. We've looked at hundreds of portfolios to try to see like what's the thing that really makes these good to us. When we look at this, why does this one attract us more than some of the other ones? And so the last and final point that we've kind of pulled out was the retrospective. Was the
what could you do different?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If you could do it again.
Yeah. Well, can you guys talk a little bit about some of the projects you've worked on where you've gotten either, if you're not comfortable naming names, that's fine. But, what in your experience has been a project where maybe one example of where things worked really beautifully and you got out of it exactly what you wanted creatively, and another one where the constraints were so bad you had to sort of make do with what you had? I mean, I think, a lot of folks tend to think in sort of the perfect situation as though that's going to ever be something consistently attainable. And maybe once in a while it is, but for the most part, clients can be kind of challenging, which is I think a nice way of putting that.
Yeah.
Clients or your teammates.
Oh God, yes.
Well, I've got plenty of stories. I don't know.
If you want to start, I'm going to have to think.
Right.
So I've worked at product companies, and so trying to pick one specific project is a little bit harder. So let me mull on that.
All right. So I've got both from the client relationship stuff when I was consulting. Some examples of really great, like they just got it. Actually, I think a mutual friend of ours, Teague, Kevin DeWalt, he'd probably appreciate being called out. We were working on a project where he was trying to explore and find some pain and figure out how could he help entrepreneurs connect with their audiences. And so we had this really great back and forth where we worked together every single week. We almost had like a week by week get together. We'd kind of define what it was in the beginning of the week that we were trying to explore and what the goals were, what we were going to build. And at the end of the week, we'd get back together and circle up on like, hey, what did we do? What worked? What didn't? What are we going to do next week? That was a great experience. There's plenty of the not so great things where, you jump into something and they don't really know what they want to build, but they think they have an idea. Actually, all they have is an idea, and you start, this was early on with the client stuff where for me, it was much more difficult to say, you know what, just pick a direction. We're going to make something, because by building, we're going to be exploring. And we got stuck for, days, weeks, maybe even months in idea land, just trying to like get the perfect thing designed up front. These days, though, I'm working at a company called Power Supply. So we work with local chefs to serve customers who eat with a purpose. And nice. There's some really, it's amazing the stuff that we're able to do there with such a small team, in that we're so focused on understanding the real pain points, the real problems. I mean, for example, we have a problem roadmap. We don't have a product roadmap, where we talk about not just our customers, but we have so many different types of users, from our chefs to our internal team, local delivery, the pick and pack fruit, like all these people that interact with our system that we need to understand. How do they all, what are they feeling? How can we help them? What can we make better? So some of the good and bad from there, and I don't know, I'll let you talk in just a little bit. Sorry. But there's
Paul, you're not supposed to dominate the conversation. Come on.
Some of the good stuff there is when we have a very well-defined problem and we can execute on it because we get it. One example, see if I can pull it out, is we were opening up in a second city earlier this year in Los Angeles. And it's super clear. It's like, okay, we need to take the exact same thing and think about it from the customer's perspective of, what if I was in Los Angeles? Or what if I'm in Washington, D.C.? And so it was pretty clear step by step where each of the problems we would encounter would be. One of the more unclear things is, for a while we were trying to build a referral program, but we didn't really know. There were multiple referral programs. Like we were thinking like maybe one for nutritionists and one for personal trainers and one for friends. And, it took us a long time to figure out who it was that we were making this for and what their motivation was behind referring. And we were stuck in that for months trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And did you figure it out? Do you have a solution?
Yeah, no. So that's the beauty is, just sticking to the process. And, sometimes you need a little bit of patience. You need to sit back and let things happen so that you can observe and make some connections after the fact. One of the best things I've learned, is it's okay to do nothing. Sometimes it's okay to just sit there and it's not, every week you look back and you're like, what could we do better this week? And you don't need to have an answer for that every time. It's okay to sit with the chaos, to sit with the ambiguity and just kind of let it well up inside of you, because who knows, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, a couple months from now, you'll circle back and you're just like, oh, duh, of course, that's what it was. Like you catch a metaphor and then all of a sudden it's very clear to you what you should have done.
So from Elementum at my startup company that I was at 3 months ago, I was there for about 2 years. And I think the toughest thing for me working there was the process of design education. So I think they had this idea of they wanted to be a design-driven company, but they thought that meant that they would have just beautiful products. So the UI would be gorgeous, and that means that they were a design-driven company. So there's a little bit of education that had to happen along the way. And that, we need to talk to users. We need to get feedback from them and interact with them. And there's this whole other thing of like figuring out what's the right problem that we should be solving. That's not something that happens at the leadership level and then you just pass it off to the design team and we make it beautiful. There was a little back and forth. So there's a little bit of growing pains. But I think the shining moment that I got working there was we actually were able to go to a customer and had an on-site research session where we did a lot of design exercises and it clicked. They got it. They're like, oh, this is what you guys do. This is awesome. And I think that moment for me was like, oh, when people just get it, they see that's what design is. That's what you do. You should do more of that. That's awesome.
It's very gratifying to have people recognize what it is that you're actually trying to do to provide value.
Yeah.
It's so hard sometimes. I mean, I think,
Cool. Oh, sorry.
yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, I think for a lot of people, the challenge in any field, design and otherwise, is that, you often feel your work is underappreciated, right? That sense of, I'm putting in all this time and energy and effort, and ultimately nobody's giving me my just desserts. Do you think that in the design world, there is a particular challenge with that? I mean, given that there is, from a product side, certainly an incredible focus on UX, I imagine that there's, quite a lot of people out there who sometimes feel as though it's skipped over or not listened to, enough. I mean, is there still, I guess my question is there still a need to help businesses understand what design, UX, UI, and the whole sort of ecosystem around that, what value it brings to the table?
Mm-hmm.
So I can circle this back and answer the earlier question too, which was about looking at designer portfolios, and the first thing you think is like more of a graphic design, like there's just a bunch of really nice, pretty pictures. And I think it stems from the fact that, if you look at everything around you, it's all been designed in some way. Mm-hmm. Like whether it's the steering wheel here in my car, the lamppost outside, the license plates, the systems for recognizing these things. For example, the system of traffic lights, all that stuff's been designed in some way. But when it came to web design, it became very closely associated with graphic design, with traditional print media, because, that's the World Wide Web. It's a web page. So let's just take the same exact principles that we have for designing on a physical page and try to apply them to this web medium, which, at the early days, it was all about text, hypertext. It was all about writing the words. So, caring about the how it looked visually, the composition, the typography, all that stuff early on. I think that's what drew a lot of people from graphic design into the field of web design. It's also very accessible. It's something anybody can do. You can just, hop on if you have a computer and teach yourself, because there's so many resources out there, and it's always been a community like that. So with that in mind, though, it has brought some of the baggage of print design, of graphic design with it, which is the emphasis on the visual communication. The same design process when you're designing a poster for a movie theater, where you're designing a brochure for a company, or signage for a fridge, where you're thinking about the audience, you're thinking about the tone, you're thinking about the message you want to say, you're thinking about where it's going to be, you're thinking about the people who are going to interact with it and what action they're going to take next. That process is exactly the same for the web, but the end result is very different. In graphic design, you do end up with a pretty picture, and it's really easy to share that because it's beautiful most of the time. On the web, it's not like this end point. It's not a fixed, there is no finish on the web. There's always we can make this just a little better. There's always some iteration.
Yeah. Well, and like anything else, I mean, I imagine that some of it is, sorry, it's getting a little loud behind me. I imagine that some of it is that you have to, when you talk about iteration, there's always a need to want to continue to work on something. But in the end, I imagine there's also that part of you that's sort of like, you can only do so much of the Mona Lisa, right? At some point, you just have to stop and move on. Is that a challenge as well? Like getting clients to understand, or getting partners to understand, when to stop, I guess. At a certain point, it's not about trying to get it perfect. It's about getting it right and, right for right now and moving on.
Right. Yeah. So I think the biggest, when I was talking about design education earlier, one of the things that I like to encourage is, what are we trying to learn? If we're at a point where we know our hypotheses, or we have something that's good enough to test, so we can learn if it's right or if it's wrong. And so that we can then make a decision of, okay, this was the right direction. There's a bigger conversion, whatever the goal is. If we've met that goal or we have not met that goal, then we can go back to, redesign it, tweak it, modify it. But it's always about, what do you want to learn? And can we learn something with what we have currently? Or do we need to make a few changes in order to make sure that we're learning the right thing, or that we meet those goals, whatever those goals might be that you're trying to achieve?
It's very
it's always learning.
Yes, it's so lean.
Similar, yeah. Now, interestingly enough, and I think this is where it kind of breaks from lean startup methodologies, and when you start getting a little bit more into what people consider user experience, is that you're trying in most cases to drive some sort of emotional response. And how do you measure an emotional response? How do you measure like joy or delight or something when somebody checks a website, or when they finish purchasing something online or whatever? How do you it's a very difficult thing to measure. So there's a lot of qualitative stuff there where you talk with people and you try to listen and see, like, how are people feeling? Is that the response that you were hoping for? If not, how do we tweak it? What do we need to change so that instead of people feeling frustrated or confused, they feel good or they feel excited about the thing?
Nice. Well, we've covered a lot in a relatively short period of time. Teague, any thoughts or other questions that you wanted to touch base on?
What was the process of writing the book like, working together on that? How did you?
It took longer than expected.
Yeah.
We started last Thanksgiving, and we're like, this will take like 2 months. We'll be done, and like by the new year.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of piggyback on the story from earlier, we had a bunch of people asking questions, and so we wrote a couple blog posts. And after we wrote the blog posts, we sat down and we're like, okay, what else? Like, what other questions are people asking? And we literally just had a list of all these questions that we wanted to answer. And after, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it's just like we had maybe 50 questions on a list. Mm-hmm. Everything related from, what do I call myself, to the interview process, like, how do I do a good phone screening, or, kind of this wide range of questions. And when we looked at that list, like, as we're scanning it off the top of our head, every question we looked at, we had a really good answer for. We're like, oh yeah, we'll just write answers for these things, and it'll be pretty quick, and we'll see what happens. But as usual, you start digging into it, and there's so many little details and nuances, and we ended up restructuring the book, because there's a narrative that we wanted to tell. At first, we wanted to make this more of a something similar to Rework by Jason Fried and DHH, where it's just like a book of maxims, where like you open up a thing and it's like, pretty pictures aren't everything. And we had like a short mini essay. Yeah. But we found that after sharing, so this whole process was very iterative too, working with design students or people getting into design, or even experienced designers, and kind of sharing with them and seeing how they reacted and seeing where are they getting stuck, what do they need help understanding, and how are we telling this story in a way that they get it, or how are we telling it in a way that they aren't getting it and we need a shift.
So one of the other things, how you mentioned, how do you know when you're done, or how do you help a client know when you're done? The book is not done. There's so much more that we want to add to the book, but we have enough now that we felt like it's definitely worth getting it out there. It's not fair that we're holding all of this back. We need to get it out, and we need to get the knowledge out there, and then we want to make it better, and we want to get feedback, and we want to constantly add to the book. So again, it's one of those things of like, we didn't feel like it was done, but it's good enough. It definitely has a lot of really great content and tips in there. So it was like, let it be free, give it out to the public. Let's see what happens.
Very cool.
Well, one thing we struggled with was do we sell it or do we not sell it? So we flipped back and forth on that a number of times. Because our goal with this is to get it into the hands of as many designers as possible, because we want more people presenting themselves better. Because if there's more designers getting more jobs in the industry, then there's better design happening everywhere, and everyone benefits from it. So we really contemplated, what if we just put this thing out there for everybody to be able to share? We keep updating it. Maybe we even open source it, where people. We're actually writing it on Git using Markdown. Nice. And that's how we synced it between the two of us. We tried Dropbox and Google Docs and everything, but Git was the thing that worked in the end because of the version control, where I wouldn't accidentally open up Google Docs and realize like, shoot, I accidentally deleted like 3 pages and I have no idea where they went. But yeah, we contemplated that, and really what pushed us towards, let's put a price on it, was the value. Was we don't want this to be just another thing that is like a free resource that people look at and they're like, oh, that's cool, and end up not reading through because there's a lot of stuff in there. So we experimented with giving it out and seeing, we've got analytics tracking, and we're seeing, how long people spend on different pages, and we talked to them about it, and we realized people were skipping around or just, not even reading through it if it was just given it to them, even if they had the same need as someone else, where they were trying to put together their portfolio, they're looking for a job, they're active in all this stuff. And the moment that we put a price on it, people took it much more seriously, and they ended up going through and reading the book and applying the things that they were learning. So we figured in the end, selling it in that way is the thing that makes the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah. It's very cool to see the impact of, it is possible to undervalue your product. And when you assign a value to it, people start actually interacting with it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yep.
Dig it.
Give us a tiny preview of what's in the book. What's one thing that you think that folks who are trying to get a job in UX design should be aware of when they're trying to get that job? What's your favorite piece of advice?
So let's see. So for me, it's so a lot of young designers are new to the field. They don't know if they have the right projects or how many projects are enough in order to get their portfolio out there. And some of the advice that we like to give is there are things called hackathons. Hackathons are a great way for you to just, like, in one weekend, like, hammer out one project, document the whole process that happened while you're at the hackathon and what the outcome was, and that's enough. That's the design process. You went through it in a weekend. As long as you document it, that's enough for you to have a project on your portfolio. So that's one way to do it. And then as long as you get 3 of those, that's usually enough for someone to look and then assess if you have the right design fit or thinking or process that would be something that the company wants to hire.
Very cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
and for me,
go ahead.
Very quickly. Mm-hmm. It's be you. Show the mistakes, show the screw ups, show the pain, show the frustration, because that's part of the process. And it happens all the time. It probably happens more often that you're frustrated and you're confused and you just have no idea what's going on than you do know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And if you try to just put together a nice, clean portfolio where everything was perfect, I'm going to wonder, like, well, did you do any of the work?
That's fair.
But if you share all the struggles, the tough parts, it's just like, all right, what I see from you is that you know how to work through real life. You know how to make it happen and keep going. And that's really valuable for a designer. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Well,
that's fantastic.
Real quick before we close out, where can folks reach out to you? Where do you want them to go if they want to either get in touch or check out the book when it's, what's the best way to reach out to you? I guess is the question.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter's a good one.
Yep. So if you're watching, you have my handle. Yep. It's at PVM.
And then
Brittany is at Brim, BRIM.
BRIM.
But anyway, email works. If you see us online, just Google our names, whatever, Facebook. Come say hi to us at Verve Coffee in Santa Cruz. We always love catching up with people.
Very cool.
Excellent. And we'll get a link to your book on our website, which for folks who are listening, that's StartupJab.com. Sign up for our mailing list to find out about more of our shows as well.
Very cool. Well, we appreciate the time. Thank you guys so much. And hopefully we'll see you back on the show sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Great.
This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Teague and Jason.
Thank you guys for coming.
Bye, guys.